captain caught Ginta's eye as she frowned at the Exos notion. Apparently she didn't like the idea of staging animal fights for fun and profit either, but probably for reasons like morality and empathy. No, I don't think I'm going to feed Steven to the night beast. Not today, anyway. Probably. Turning to his XO, Anikton said, "Tell me, Mashi, you were part of the tracking and recovery team. Where is this thing from?" "That's the question of the hour," said the other man, using a set of grasping tentacles to rub his proboscis. "He may have been part of a convoy, fell out of some massive group warp bubble and became lost. His ship has a warp field generator of its own, but it's small and crude." Tikikik in engineering looked at the computer too, to try and find out where it came from, but even with the AI helping, she says it's totally bricked. "We think that's what caused him to be stranded in the first place. This ship is powered by antimatter dash." "What?" bellowed the captain. "Once we found out, we jettisoned it. Thanks the gods and lords." The captain shook his head in disbelief. "That's just insane. So wait a minute. If it has a warp drive and is powered by antimatter of all things, why would you jump to the conclusion that it was part of a convoy?" "It's the only thing that makes sense," Mashi explained. The maximum range of its craft with a full containment field was about 400 light-years. 40% of its containment had been expended, so I take it there are no habitable world within 160 light-years. "You're quick with math, sir, and no." The captain rubbed his furrowed brow and sighed. "So it is possible that it will be missed. That's not good news. Maybe they'll just chalk it up to the hazards of driveless warp travel," the XO reasoned. "And even if they do come looking, if there's a whole group of these things trying to get somewhere at once, then it must be pretty important, so I doubt they'll start right away. I've got a super predator and possible super soldier on my ship. The human was probably part of some alien invasion force heading for one of the fringe territories. His ship looked exactly like an orbital drop pod with a warp field generator attached. Doesn't it? There was some evidence that it was a multi-staged craft, yes. The drive section may have been designed to be discarded in order to allow planetary entry of the capsule. But there is the question of why it would travel using a convoy's warp bubble when it has a perfectly good drive of its own, which it won't use and then discard before planetfall. Could be standardization of design, but I really doubt that. But if that's not the case, then we're back to the question of range," he huffed. And he lifted his snout from his hand where it had been buried in frustration. "And there were no weapons aboard his craft," said Mashi. "Though he was wearing a surprisingly strong set of armor. It appears to impervious to vacuum, radiation, heat, cold, small arms fire, large arms fire, poisonous atmospheres, and hostile wildlife, among other things. The thing is tough but flexible." "His people have that kind of technology?" "Not really, no," the XO explained, gesturing a tentacle in the negative. "Not in the sense that you mean. It's not terribly advanced. Any of the galactic races could make something like that. They just couldn't make use of it. It took 4 of us just to drag it to the cargo hold." The captain's expression went flat. "And he was wearing it?" Yes, he was." "In here?" Anticton asked, pointing to the deck. "Not out on some extravehicular excursion?" "Yes, in here." The XO pulled his proboscis tightly shut, the equivalent of pursing his lips. It seems that he didn't like where this conversation was going either. A thought occurred to the captain. "Then just how in the 7 hells of Boragon did you even get him out of it?" "Oh, we asked him to remove it." "Asked?" "Yes, he's very nice dash. I don't give a shit how nice he is. I just dash." Mashi hastened to interrupt. "Sir, I don't think he knows he's been abducted into slavery. That was just plain dumb." His assessment of this being's race fell a few notches. On the other hand, It was entirely possible that this genetic freak was not representative of its people. In fact, it was entirely likely he wasn't. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. If this was a super soldier on its way to war, the thing had only to sit in its pod, land, and fight. It didn't need to be very smart, which might have contributed to why its computer was destroyed, explained how it couldn't find its way back, and explained why it didn't know it was a piece of merchandise. Heck, the thing was probably so dumb that its people wouldn't have even bothered to give it a gun until after it had landed and had safe direction in which to point it. It was probably programmed to be compliant and take orders, which was why it seemed get along well with everyone. "One last thing before I go, sir," the vet said meekly. He had forgotten that Ginta was even standing there. Well, it looks similar to to what? T2? She stuttered softly. "Spit it out," he said impatiently, motioning for her to continue. "That thing," she whispered, pointing to the deck below her feet. The captain and XO each sucked in a breath of air. He hadn't thought about it, but the more he did, the more the captain realized she was right. They were both bipedal tetrapods, for one. It was an efficient but inherently unstable design, suited for organisms that were either on the move or at rest and nowhere in between. They were both mostly bald, for another. Their heads were differently shaped, but not nearly as much as any two other races might have been. The coloration was different. This human was a pale mottled cream color, and night beasts generally were anywhere from light blue to purple to jet black. They were the same general height from heel to scalp, though the human might have been taller and bulkier, actually. And then there were their eyes. Forward-facing, like gun barrels aimed right at you, bright and dangerous. He hoped the humans didn't glow at night like the beasts did. The thought sent a chill down his spine. On the other hand, comparing the two felt just plain stupid. Engineered soldier or not, Steven was one step above a friendly pet and came from a people with adequate technology. If this were a true case of convergent evolution, his people would also have to have been from a Class 11 death world almost exactly like Nick's. That simply couldn't be, because death worlds could not produce true sentience, only feral monstrosities. The captain rolled his eyes and sighed internally. He would still perform his due diligence and try his best to determine if this thing posed any real risks, even if he was highly skeptical. "XO, is it safe to talk to? The human?" he asked. "I think so," said Mashi, with Ginta nodding in agreement. "His translator is working great now, and I was chatting with him for a bit. Told him I had to lock him in his room for operational security reasons. He didn't have the clearance to be wandering about. I think he bought it. After all we've learned of him, I wouldn't let slip that he's anything other than a guest. He might not be as compliant." The captain thought a moment. "Ginta, your evening is cancelled. You'll start developing poisons and sedatives to use on this thing immediately. Airborne but harmless to everyone else if possible. Go now." The woman nodded and slowly trotted off the bridge, even her hoofbeats sounding dejected. "I'm going to go have a chat with Steven before I retire for the evening," said Captain Anticton. With that, he stood from his chair and left without another word.